Berlin, November 1923. A single loaf of bread costs 200 billion marks. A postage stamp requires 50 billion. Workers are paid twice daily, and their wives wait at factory gates at noon to seize the banknotes before prices climb again by evening. The money is printed on one side only now, because ink and paper cost more than the currency is worth. Children build towers from bricks of banknotes. Housewives light stoves with them, because paper marks burn cheaper than firewood. This is the death of a currency watched in real time by 60 million people. In January 1923, one American dollar buys roughly 17,000 marks. By November, that same dollar commands 4.2 trillion. The number is not a metaphor. It is printed in the official exchange tables of the Reichsbank, a figure so large it loses all meaning. Yet here is the strange truth at the heart of this story. While the money died, Germany itself did not. The factories of the Ruhr still stood. The coal still lay beneath the earth. The shipyards of Hamburg, the steelworks of Essen, the apartment blocks of Berlin, the farmland of Bavaria, all of it remained, solid and real, untouched by the paper storm. A nation's true wealth is not its currency. It is its land, its machines, its buildings, its labor. And in 1923, that wealth was suddenly on sale, priced in a currency that evaporated by the hour. For anyone holding something, the marks were not gold, dollars, Swiss francs, Dutch guilders. Germany had become the largest clearance sale in modern history. A 4-story building in central Cologne could be had for the price of a good suit in New York. A controlling stake in a manufacturing firm cost less than a family car in Amsterdam. The Germans, drowning in worthless paper, would sell almost anything for something that held its value. And the buyers were already coming, stepping off trains at the Anhalter Bahnhof with fat wallets of foreign banknotes. To understand how a whole economy came to be bought for pennies, we must first understand how the money began to die. And that story begins not in 1923, but 5 years earlier, in a railway carriage in France. The seeds were planted on the 28th of June 1919 in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. The treaty imposed on defeated Germany demanded reparations that would eventually be fixed in 1921 at 132 billion gold marks, an astronomical sum equal to hundreds of billions in today's money. Germany was to pay in gold, in foreign currency, in coal and timber and chemicals for decades to come. But the German treasury was already hollow. The Great War had been financed not by taxes but by borrowing. The government sold war bonds to its own citizens, promising to repay them after a victory that never came. By 1918, the national debt stood at 150 billion marks, and the money supply had already tripled. The Reichsbank had discovered a dangerous habit. It could simply print what it lacked. Now, facing reparations it could not meet, and a population it dared not tax, the government turned to the printing presses again. This was not accident, but calculation. A government drowning in debt has a hidden temptation. Inflation quietly erases what it owes. Every mark printed diluted the value of the war bonds held by ordinary Germans. Every mark printed made the state's internal debts lighter. The savers would pay, invisibly, through the melting value of their money. In January 1923, the crisis exploded. Germany fell behind on reparations, and French and Belgian troops marched into the Ruhr, seizing the industrial heartland to extract payment directly. The German government called for passive resistance. Workers struck, factories stopped, and Berlin printed money to pay the idle millions. The presses ran day and night. By autumn, 133 printing firms and 783 machines worked around the clock, and still they could not keep pace. The mark was no longer falling. It was collapsing, having in value not by the month, but by the hour. What began as a strategy to escape obligation had become an avalanche no one could stop. And, as the numbers spiraled into the trillions, the real cost fell not on governments or generals, but on the man standing in line at the bakery, watching the price of bread change while he waited. Consider a single loaf of bread. In 1918, it cost less than 1 mark. By early 1923, it cost 250 marks. By August, 69,000. By October, 1.5 million. By the 20th of November, the price reached 200 billion marks. Behind each number was a human being, watching their life savings turn to confetti. Workers were now paid daily, then twice daily. Employers handed out wages in laundry baskets, in suitcases, in wheelbarrows. A famous photograph shows a woman feeding banknotes into her stove. It was cheaper to burn money than to buy coal with it. Another shows children playing with bundled bricks of marks as building blocks in the street. The rituals of a functioning society dissolved. When a man was paid at noon, he literally ran to the shops, because by afternoon the same money bought half as much. Restaurants stopped printing prices. The cost of a meal rose between ordering and paying the bill. A cup of coffee might double in price while you drank it. People carried cash in wheelbarrows, and thieves stole the wheelbarrows, leaving the worthless money dumped on the pavement. The cruelest blow fell on the prudent, the German middle class. The doctors, teachers, pensioners, and clerks who had saved carefully and bought war bonds out of patriotism watched their entire fortunes vanish. A lifetime savings of 100,000 marks, once enough to retire on, would not buy a streetcar ticket. Widows living on fixed pensions were reduced to selling furniture, jewelry, wedding rings. The values of thrift, patience, and trust in the state, the very foundations of bourgeois life, were being punished, while gamblers and debtors were rewarded. And from this desperation came a single overwhelming impulse, to convert paper into anything real, anything that held value. Germans sold pianos, paintings, land, and shares, often for foreign currency, at any price, simply to escape the burning money in their pockets. A nation of savers had become a nation of frantic sellers. All that remained was for the buyers to arrive, men whose wallets held not marks, but dollars. They came by train and by ocean liner, stepping onto German soil with pockets full of the only thing anyone wanted, stable foreign money. Americans led the way, their dollars multiplying in purchasing power by the day. Dutch investors crossed the border with guilders. The British came with pounds, the Swiss with francs. To them, Germany in 1923 was not a tragedy. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. The mechanics were brutally simple. A visitor exchanged, say, $100 for marks in the morning. Because the mark fell hourly, those marks bought more real goods than a German salary earned over months. A single American traveler could live like an aristocrat. The best hotel suite in Berlin, dinner at the finest restaurant, a chauffeured car, all for pocket change. Ernest Hemingway, then a young reporter, described crossing into Germany and buying a feast of apples and pastries for a handful of coins, marveling that a day's spending money for a foreigner equaled a fortune for the locals. But the true dollar kings were not tourists. They were investors who understood that food and hotels were trivial. The real prizes were assets, buildings, factories, shares in great companies. When you hold a currency rising against a collapsing one, every day you wait, the price falls further in your terms. Foreign buyers found German sellers eager, even desperate, to trade brick and steel for anything that would hold value. Reports from the period describe Americans buying whole rows of apartment houses in Berlin for a few $1,000s. A 4-story building might change hands for the price of a modest car back home. Estates in the countryside, mansions, entire share portfolios, all could be acquired for sums that, converted back into hard currency, seemed almost fraudulent in their smallness. The German press began to speak with alarm of Ausverkauf Deutschlands, the sell-off of Germany. Whole districts of major cities were passing into foreign hands. And this was only the visible surface. The deeper transfer, the quiet purchase of the nation's productive heart, its industry and its machines, was already underway, and it would reshape who owned Germany for a generation. The apartment blocks and mansions were only the beginning. The greatest prizes were the engines of the German economy: the factories, the mines, the shipping lines, the shares that controlled them. And in 1923, they too were for sale, priced in a currency that meant nothing. Foreign syndicates moved methodically. A group holding dollars could buy a controlling block of shares in a German manufacturing firm for a fraction of its real worth, because the shares were quoted in marks, and the marks were dying. When the currency finally stabilized, that stake would be worth a fortune in real terms, bought effectively for almost nothing. Dutch and American investors acquired interests in chemical works, textile mills, and engineering plants. Rumors swirled through Berlin of entire industrial concerns, passing quietly into foreign ownership through intermediaries and holding companies. The transfers were often invisible. No factory changed its sign. No worker was told. Ownership shifted on paper, in share ledgers and notarial deeds, while the machines kept turning and the smoke kept rising. A German firm might still bear a German name, still employ German workers, yet answer now to shareholders in Amsterdam or New York. But the sharpest operators were not always foreigners. The chaos rewarded anyone who grasped its single iron rule: hold real assets, owe worthless money. On the domestic side, a new breed of German speculator understood this better than the government itself. The most formidable of them was Hugo Stinnes. While ordinary Germans clutched their melting savings, Stinnes did the opposite. He borrowed enormous sums in marks, knowing the debt would evaporate to nothing, and used the cash to buy tangible things: coal mines, steelworks, newspapers, hotels, forests, ships. As the mark collapsed, his loans dissolved, while his empire of real assets multiplied. He was building the largest industrial combine in Europe out of the ruins. By 1923, contemporaries called him the richest man in Germany, perhaps in all of Europe. The collapse was not destroying wealth. It was transferring it from the many who saved to the few who understood. And no one understood the mechanics of that transfer more completely or exploited them more ruthlessly than the man they would soon call the inflation king. In the summer of 1923, one name dominated the German economy: Hugo Stinnes. To savers, he was a thief in a frock coat. To debtors, he was proof that the rules had been rewritten. Stinnes understood a brutal truth that most Germans learned too late. In a collapsing currency, cash is a curse and debt is a gift. He borrowed marks by the millions, marks that would be worth nothing within weeks, and spent them on things that could not evaporate: coal mines in the Ruhr, steel mills, shipping lines, newspapers, hotels, forests. He repaid those loans in currency so worthless that a 1 billion mark note might not buy a postage stamp. His creditors handed him fortunes and received wastepaper in return. By 1923, the Stinnes concern controlled an estimated 535 legally separate companies, employing hundreds of thousands. He owns some 500 kilometers of the German press, coal fields, ironworks, electrical firms, and a fleet of steamers. Foreign observers called him the new Kaiser of German industry, the man who had bought a country with money that died in his hands. His method was elegant in its cruelty. Every hour the mark fell, his debts shrank, while his assets held their real value in coal, iron, and brick. The collapse did not punish him. It rewarded him precisely because he owed so much. Meanwhile, the pensioner clutching government bonds, the widow with her life savings in a bank account, the careful clerk who had done everything right, all of them were annihilated. The mark punished virtue and crowned recklessness. Stinnes embodied the logic of the whole catastrophe. Wealth was not being destroyed. It was being transferred from those who trusted paper to those who seized the physical world. When Stinnes died in April 1924, his empire, over-leveraged and overbuilt, collapsed almost as fast as it had risen. But the lesson stood. The inflation had not made Germany poorer in factories or fields. It had simply changed who held the deeds. And while men like Stinnes accumulated industry, Another quieter transfer was underway, one that touched the very soil, the manor houses, and the treasures of the nation itself. Beyond the factories lay something harder to replace, the land itself, and the accumulated inheritance of generations. As the mark disintegrated, estates that had belonged to the same families for centuries came onto the market. Aristocratic landowners, cash-starved and drowning in obligations denominated in worthless paper, sold ancestral acres to anyone holding real value. Foreign buyers with dollars, pounds, and guilders found German soil astonishingly cheap. A country estate in Prussia, a villa on a lake, a townhouse in Berlin's finest districts, all could change hands for the price of a modest apartment abroad. Dutch investors bought farmland along the borders. Americans acquired shares, buildings, and entire portfolios of real estate through Berlin agents who worked in commissions paid in stable currency. But the loss went deeper than deeds and boundaries. The German middle class, the middle stand that had been the spine of the nation, watched its entire world dissolve. Family businesses built over decades were sold to cover a single month's bills. Heirlooms went first. The wedding silver, the piano, the grandfather's watch, carried to pawnshops and bought by foreigners for pocket change. Art collections were dispersed. Rare books, paintings, and antiques flowed out of the country in the luggage of visitors who paid in hard money. Entire libraries and family archives were liquidated. The cultural treasure of a civilization leaked abroad, one transaction at a time. What made it unbearable was its quiet legality. No army marched. No treaty was signed at gunpoint. The transfer happened through contracts, receipts, and notarized bills of sale, each one voluntary, each one a small surrender made in desperation. A professor sold his house to eat. A widow sold her dead husband's collection to survive the winter. The nation was not conquered. It was purchased, room by room, field by field, by those who happened to hold currency that still meant something. And every German who lost a home or an heirloom carried away a wound that would not heal, a conviction that the system had robbed them while calling it commerce. Then, in November 1923, the government finally acted to stop the bleeding, and a strange new money appeared. On November 15, 1923, Germany introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark. Its arrival ended the madness almost overnight, and the speed of the recovery seemed like a miracle. The mechanics were the work of a handful of men, chief among them Hjalmar Schacht, appointed currency commissioner, and finance minister Hans Luther. The Rentenmark was backed not by gold, which Germany did not have, but by a mortgage on the nation's agricultural and industrial land, a fiction of collateral that the exhausted public was willing to believe. One Rentenmark equaled 1 trillion old paper marks. The exchange rate was fixed. The printing presses that had spewed out quintillions were finally stilled. Confidence, that invisible thing, returned. Prices stabilized within weeks. Shops that had rewritten their tags every hour now kept them for days, then months. Wages could once again be saved. The wheelbarrows of cash vanished. By 1924, with the addition of the Dawes Plan and an infusion of American loans, Germany appeared to have stepped back from the abyss. The mark was saved. But here lay the cruel arithmetic. The currency had been rescued only after it had finished its work. Every fortune that could be destroyed had already been destroyed. Every asset that could be seized had already changed hands. Stabilization did not return a single factory to its former owner, did not restore a widow's savings, did not bring home the paintings sold abroad. The new money protected wealth going forward, but it froze the transfer permanently in place. Whoever held the deeds on November 15th kept them. The foreign investors, the debtors, the speculators, all locked in their gains at the moment the music stopped. For the savers, the pensioners, and the vanished middle class, the Rentenmark arrived like a doctor pronouncing a patient stable long after the amputation was complete. Germany had a functioning currency again, and a completely rearranged map of ownership. The question that remained was not whether the mark could be fixed. It could, and was. The question was what such a transfer does to a people and what it leaves behind. When the dust settled in 1924, Germany still stood. The factories still turned. The fields still yielded harvests. The buildings still lined the streets of Berlin, Munich, and Hamburg. But behind the deeds, ownership had shifted, and the psychological wreckage was total. An entire class, the thrifty, rule-following bourgeoisie that had anchored German society, had been financially wiped out. They had trusted the state's paper, bought its bonds, kept their savings in banks, and been rewarded with ruin. Meanwhile, debtors, speculators, and foreign buyers had emerged enriched. This inversion of moral order poisoned something deeper than any balance sheet. The bitterness that followed did not fade with stabilization. Millions of Germans concluded that hard work meant nothing, that the honest were fools, that unseen forces, financiers, foreigners, and profiteers had engineered their destruction and walked away with the spoils. This resentment became a political raw material of terrifying potency. It corroded faith in the Weimar Republic, in democracy, and the very idea that the system was fair. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, that earlier wound reopened. Germans who had already lost everything once refused to endure it again, and they turned to voices promising to restore order, punish the guilty, and reclaim what had been stolen. The hyperinflation of 1923 did not directly cause what came after, but it lit a fuse that burned for a decade. It taught a generation that stability could vanish overnight, that money was a lie, and that ownership belonged to whoever moved fastest and cared least. The foreign investors who bought Germany for pennies had, in a sense, purchased more than assets. They had helped purchase a grievance, a story a wounded nation would tell itself about victimhood and betrayal. No shells fell, no borders moved. And yet a conquest had occurred, silent and complete, conducted entirely through the collapse of a number printed on paper. This is the lesson written in the ruins of the mark, the truth that every currency crisis since has confirmed in its own way. When the printing presses run wild and confidence dies, the physical world does not disappear. It merely finds new masters. A currency dies, and ownership changes hands.